Wednesday, June 18th meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Board. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Present. Here. Commissioner Arnerich. Here. Commissioner Budd is absent. Alternate McCoy. Here. Commissioner Durant.
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here.
Commissioner Hudson. Here. Commissioner Metcalf. Here. Commissioner Mitchoff. Here. Commissioner Taylor. And Chair Romick.
Here.
So 11 present. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, I'm sorry, I should also announce that we have ex officio representatives here. Myrna De Vera. And Gail Murray. Thank you.
Okay. Public comment. I have one speaker card. Mr. Ralph Hoffman.
Good evening, board members. Ralph Hoffman from beautiful downtown Walnut Creek. I heard Randy or somebody mention that 2CTA isn't as well known as Board of Supervisors or many of the city councils or other organizations in the county. I would suggest that you be televised on CCTV like the Board of Supervisors or San Ramon City Council or a few of the other organizations are, and I believe you would get much better known. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board on issues that are not on the agenda at this time? Move on to item 1.0, approval of the minutes.
So moved. Second.
First and a second. First by Abelson, second by Pierce. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Two abstentions, Metcalf and McCoy. Item 2.0, consent calendar. Is there anybody who would like to remove any items at this time? I would like to remove 2A10 and ask for a little update on the progress of how we're doing on that particular item. Is there a motion on the remainder?
Second.
First by Glover, second by McCoy.
You're just too slow today, Dave.
Yeah. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. Randy, could you address 2.8.10? Okay. Oh, there. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director for Projects with the Authority, ready to serve on this item. This item's actually an information item that was held as a placeholder for the APC, actually the last two meetings, with the intent that if we concluded some discussions with the city, we'd have an agreement that we could bring forward. So that's really why the item's there. And let me give you a little bit of background and status on where we are with the project, because I think that puts it in context. As you recall, this is a project that was in the expenditure plan and has received a lot of support from the authority through the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP. In total, we've committed about $25 million to the project, and that was after a series of discussion where both the authority here and the city reaffirmed their commitment to this project. The city has on numerous occasions declared that this is the top priority for the city, and it became a favorite project and a priority project for us. you probably remember, or many of you I'm sure remember, several discussions and presentations we had here with William Silva, the project manager, working with the city. And William should be given a lot of credit for taking a project that kind of became dormant during some difficulties with the city and resurrecting it a little bit, and got an assist from Julie in developing a phase plan that could bite off pieces of the project and deliver those pieces of the project while the entire overall $77 million project gets funded and gets worked on. So with that, the city did deliver the project. We've had a couple of groundbreakings on the project. It's in construction, and it was that time where we became more formally involved. We've been assisting the city, but it was at that time that the city asked us to assume construction management responsibility. So that's an action we took on recently when we hired Ivan, is that we had the expertise and we could offer those services. So it started out with the city would continue through the environmental design process and then hand it over to us to construct in these 5 phases that were envisioned for the initial part of the project. Construction contract was awarded. Things are going relatively well as construction goes. But then a couple of other significant changes happened with the city. William Silva found other career opportunities, and I know it was a conflicted decision for him. He was very committed to the project. He moved on to other opportunities, although he has stayed involved to help us out through the transition. City is also, I guess, made a decision now to bring on a new city manager. So we're going through the transition of those 2 changes, and an additional opportunity came before us, which would be to take over the delivery of the entire project. So that's really the nature of this agreement, is to transfer that entire responsibility to us with the commensurate resources, both for our costs, our consultant costs, and the contractor's costs. So the last few months have really been working with the city staff that's still there, and sometimes it's hard to find someone. And I think right now we're down to the last discussions on a framework that we can take forward. I believe it's next week. The new city manager's on board, and we think once we meet with him and get a buy-off on this proposal, that we would be able to bring this back in July. So the long answer to maybe a simple question, the project's moving. It's like a lot of projects experiencing difficulty. Cities asked us to come in and help them deliver the project. One thing I missed, we also submitted a Tiger application on behalf of the city. It would come to the authority for $22 million, so we're waiting to hear back from that. So helping with both the funding and the delivery side, we just need a little more time to work through the details of the agreement and to make sure that we have our interests protected financially and the city understands the services that they'll get from us.
Yeah, to follow up on your last phrases there, and, you know, I'm a big proponent of this project and certainly help them to kind of figure out how to break it into pieces. And then Kevin and I, when we were back in Washington, D.C., we were pitching for that Tiger grant to finish the funding. So totally support the project, think it's a great thing. I just want to make sure when it comes back to us for final approval that it will outline the sources of the funds, and if there are any funds that have to come from the Hercules General Fund, that we make sure those funds are secure.
Yeah, I should have mentioned Randy Carlton's helping me on that, working with Nikki, and I don't even know Nikki's last name, the financial officer with the city, because we're doing exactly that to identify which dollars are in the bank, which ones are in a secure stream, and which ones we have to wait for before we start work. We're not going to start any work unless we're sure it is fully funded.
Oh, I guess the question I would ask you too, Ross, contingency funds?
I'm sorry?
Contingency funds sitting there?
Well, kind of in a big picture view, the entire project is estimated to cost $77 million, and we believe we have about $42 million in hand, although a few of those dollars are maybe a little suspect. The answer I gave Julie is really we're not going to commit ourselves to any work that's not funded. Now, what that might mean is we'd have a portion of a station out there if we just flat run out of money, but the authority is not going to be holding any bills or any costs that are not in a committed financial plan for that project. So the contingency is we're not going to start work until we know we have funding.
I guess one point I'd like to, still through, Chair? I guess one point I'd still like to make, though, the last thing I would want is the CCTA to have a flat building, not completed, sitting out there, and we were involved. That's not our style.
We're working very diligently, and hopefully we can come through on this project like we have in some in East County.
Yeah, everything I hear compels me to ask, you do intend to bring this to the APC before you bring it to the board?
I do not think we will have a final agreement. City manager comes on June 30th, I believe, and we meet on July 3rd. I might be able to walk in an agreement. I will not have one that I can mail out. So, and then we don't meet in August.
Yeah. Well, could we at least have a verbal update of what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. It's on the agenda the same way you see it today as what's on the agenda. If we have even a 90% draft that I can bring in, we'll update a staff report and bring that in. So I guess I will, well, I think that is agendized as an action item. So we'll have it agendized as an action item so that if we have something for you to look at, we'll try to get it out 24 hours in advance so we're not hitting you 100% cold, but I don't have something I can put in the mail out. The mail out's next week for APC.
Janet.
Yes, I was just wondering if it could, in July, go to the full authority if it doesn't make the first meeting, the APC in July.
Yes, that's the way it's set up on this agenda. We weren't ready for an APC discussion, and we wanted to have a placeholder. If we were ready tonight, we would have brought it forward. So that's the intent in July. And we'll work as diligent as we can to have a discussion at APC.
Okay.
Since we're talking, is it realistic that you've got 40+ million, some soft money in there, that by June 30th, in less than 2 weeks, you're going to have all of this done, that you would be able to have an agreement? Because in order to have agreement, you have to have the funding. The answer is no. So what would you actually be bringing back?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So what we would be bringing back would be an agreement on roles and responsibilities for the management and at least a year worth of funding. So then potentially an amendment to our construction management agreement for the next project. So it's set up to be, and we often do this with our consultant contracts. We define the scope as we know it, then we do task orders as we know more. So we're setting up the agreement that way so that a task order would be initiated when the city council appropriates funds under their control, and if it has funds under our control, you all appropriate and approve the correct agreement. So you're going to see this once or twice a year as we take the next step.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ross.
Any other questions? Excuse me?
I'm sorry, I did not get the maker or second to the motion. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have motions by Federal and by Janet. First by Federal, second by Janet.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Mike, before we go on.
I thought this was just information.
We're just going to accept the report.
Staff report.
What's there to move?
To accept it.
We're accepting the report. That's all.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. Yes.
Yes, Chair Romick, I'd like to make note for the record that Representative Worth has joined the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
A grand.
Amy's late.
On to item number 3.0, major discussion items, 3B11, MTC Freight and Northern Waterfront Revitalization. Ross again.
Yes, thank you, Chair Romick. Rush Chinden again. I'm going to tee this up a little bit. Martin and I have worked collaboratively on this with several of our partners that'll participate in this discussion today. So there's really two themes to the discussion that you'll have today, and then kind of a conclusion that knits the two together. You've heard some general discussions on both of these. So the first one relates to a broad goods movement study that's underway by MTC, and working very closely with Alameda as probably the deepest focus. But there's been a commitment to look at certainly the entire Bay Area and a deeper look at the entire East Bay, including Contra Costa County, because we're often downstream from the flow of those goods that arrive or travel to the port. I'll introduce Carolyn Clevenger from MTC for a minute to kind of kick that off. The second half of the discussion would be something that has been initiated by the Board of Supervisors with Supervisor Glover as one of the primary leads related to the Northern Waterfront revitalization efforts for the Coquina Straits and the North Bay from basically Hercules out to Oakley. Obviously, these two efforts tie closely together, so we want to give you a little more in-depth discussion than we have on the past in that, and then have a discussion to get some feedback from you on how you would like to participate, how other public groups through the county could participate in any direction that you want to get this with staff as we go through this effort over the next couple of years. So at any rate, to begin that, I would like to turn it over to Carolyn Clevenger with Metropolitan Transportation Commission, who is doing the broad study that will include many separate efforts like the Northern Waterfront.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. I'm Carolyn Clevenger with MTC's Planning Section. As Ross mentioned, we're updating our Regional Goods Movement Plan. We last did one in 2004, and we are very excited to be able to give you just an introductory presentation. We're just kicking off the initiative and are doing a series of stakeholder meetings, as well as a kickoff roundtable we'll be holding in July. So we'll send that invitation out to all of you as well. You'll see Michael Fisher from Cambridge Systematics will be going through some of the initial work we've been doing. One of the key elements of goods movement is the economic development potential that you have with goods movement. So we're really happy to be here with the county. And we do hope that as we look at the regional transportation picture, the county transportation projects and programs you have, as well as more locally based economic development strategies, the more we can knit those elements together, I think the more meaningful and impactful plan we'll have. So we're excited to hear what's going on at the local level here. And I'll be here for questions. I'm going to turn over to Michael Fisher from Cambridge Systematics and Rich Seithel from the county to give the presentation.
Thanks, Carolyn, and glad to be here this evening to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in the Regional Goods Movement Study. So to start off, I guess I'd like to just address why are we talking about goods movement, and why it's not something that we typically talk about at the local level, but it is a pretty important piece of the transportation and economic development picture in the region and here in the county. There's over $600 billion worth of goods that flow within, through, and through our region. And this includes not just our import and export activity, but the goods that supply our retail establishments, our industries, and really are the underpinning of our economy. And about 32% of the jobs in the region and about 30% of the jobs here in Contra Costa County are in what we would call goods movement dependent industries. These are the industries that account for the largest share of spending on goods movement, transportation services, manufacturing, retail, trade, construction, the industries that really drive demand for goods movement. And those businesses are heavily reliant on our transportation system. We also have the nation's 5th largest marine port and 2 major airports in this region that deal with large volumes of air cargo. We have critical major highway and rail corridors that link our region and all of Northern California to the U.S. and international markets. And a lot of that ends up on our local roads and streets, those last mile connectors. And so having an understanding of what those impacts are going to be and how they need to be addressed in local plans is really critical. Goods movement also has significant public health and air quality impacts, quality of life impacts, and we want to make sure that any planning we do is cognizant of that and addresses those issues. So most of what I have on this slide is I'm sure not new to you. There's nothing unique about goods movement in this regard, and that is that there's not a whole lot of money out there to pay for the tremendous needs that we have. You know about the problems with the gas tax. In terms of how some of this plays out in the goods movement arena, MAP 21 does include several freight planning recommendations, but most of the focus is on planning at the national level and recommendations for planning frameworks at the state level, but not a lot of new money. And freight is a major topic in both the administration and the Senate bills that have been presented that would provide new freight programs, and it's one of MTC's key legislative advocacy positions. So an important part of the plan is trying to establish what should the priorities be for the region and what should we be advocating for at the federal level, but also at the state level where we just had an effort to develop a new statewide freight mobility plan that will soon be seeing the light of day. And, of course, there are many local funding sources that we can bring to bear on these problems, so we need to understand what's the right role between federal, state, and local money to address our goods movement needs. So a major element of the work that we're doing at the regional level and working with Alameda County is a very extensive outreach program to the private sector, including those industries that are affected by goods movement as well as those that provide the goods movement services, to community and environmental groups, and to other public agencies such as yourselves, to really build a collaborative process that we hope will go on well beyond the plan development to advocate for the region's needs in future funding discussions. We have an executive team that includes executive-level decision makers throughout most of the agencies in the region. Randy is a member of that executive team, and so you're represented there. We also have a regional technical advisory committee where we're using the Partnership Technical Advisory Committee, and again, staff from the CCTA and the regional transit agencies are represented on that as well. And then, as you can see, we're reaching out frequently to this wide range of stakeholder groups throughout the region. And we will be doing a series of roundtable events where we'll be getting all the stakeholders together to really talk about how do we work together, what are our regional priorities, and how do we advance them. And as Carolyn mentioned, the first of those is going to be a big kickoff event to really talk about what should our priorities be and what is our understanding of our current goods movement needs. That's going to be occurring on July 23rd from 12:30 to 4:30. So you should have receiving save the date messages about that. And I did want to this is just sort of a very quick layout of what some of the different phases of our project are. I'm not going to go into much detail on this in the interest of time, but I did want to just point out that we're at a stage now where we're just about wrapping up what we call a baseline assessment. So I'm going to be presenting some information to you today that gives you an idea of some of the kinds of information we're collecting about goods movement in the region. And then we'll be coming back to you. You can see where these major circles are. Those are points at which we'd be likely wanting to come back to you and brief you some more on what we're seeing in terms of major issues that need to be addressed, strategies that seem to be emerging as relevant to address those issues, and then presenting the regional plan so that you all are in understanding of what's going on. And that's going to be occurring really from here on through the fall of 2015. So just to quickly touch on some highlights of some of the baseline information, this is showing data that's for the region as a whole. It's, in this case, showing millions of tons of goods moved. You can see that movements that are domestic, meaning that both the origin and the destination of the movements are within the U.S., represent the largest share of what's moving in the region, and that should remain the same in the future. However, you'll notice that international trade goods are growing at a faster rate, and in fact exports are growing the fastest of all, which is one of the things that really makes this region somewhat unique as compared to the major port areas down in Southern California, which are largely import focused. So it's something that we think represents an opportunity for developing business as well as for bringing funds into the region. This is a picture of those goods movement dependent industry sectors for Contra Costa County specifically, and you can get a sense of what are some of those different types of industries. I know we sometimes think that all of the manufacturing in our region has left and gone somewhere else, but that, of course, is not the case, and I think Rich is going to talk some more about that in a little bit, as well as some of these other major trade sectors that contribute significantly to employment and output in the county. This gives you a picture of what is moving. This is regional billions of dollars of value of commodities moved, products moved in the region. We're at a point now where we're developing the same kind of information at the county level, and we'll be starting to look at how particular corridors throughout the county serve different industries and what are some of the economic patterns and dependencies on the transportation system. One of the, just a couple things I wanted to highlight here is that you can see that from a value perspective, one of the third largest pieces here is petroleum and petroleum products. A lot of that's coming here from the northern waterfront. So again, understanding some of those connections and what the transportation needs of these industries are is a really critical element of what we're trying to do in this study. Now, I thought I'd just quickly go through some of the major trends and issues and opportunities that we see in Contra Costa County related to goods movement, and I think Rich is going to pick up on some of these. First, we're seeing lower rates of growth than historically we've seen in trade in automobiles and petroleum products, which affect, of course, the Port of Richmond and the refineries, but expanding markets for other bulk exports, mineral products, waste and scrap materials actually going to Asia, and some opportunities to change some of the focus of our ports and the need to expand bulk terminals and dredge the Baldwin Shipping Channel to make sure that it's got proper depth to receive some of the large ships that are going to be coming our way. We see a real serious issue with growth in freight movement on shared passenger and freight corridors, not just our highways, but our rail corridors as well. Those of you who use the Capital Corridor, I'm sure, see that all the time. And we see potentially spillover occurring to lesser used freight routes. We're going to start to see more freight trains on some of our less used freight routes, and there are some associated issues with that. Likewise, on our highway systems, in this county, particularly I-80, 680, and State Route 4, similar kinds of conflicts and the need for selective widening, evaluating truck lane options, alternative routes, and alternative modal solutions like the Marine Highway project that's bringing barges through the channel from the Port of Stockton to the Port of Oakland. And of course, along with the increase in rail traffic, increased issues at grade crossings and noise, and the need to look at how we deal with grade separations and expanding quiet zones for our rail impacted communities. I'm sure you all know about the shift in crude supplies. You hear it all the time in the news that we're getting most of our crude to our refineries by the water and by pipeline, and that's changing, and we're starting to see an increasing amount of crude moving into the region by rail. There are a whole host of issues, capacity, safety, and other impacts that are associated with that. In this county in particular, where most of the industrial activity is occurring along places along the northern waterfront, there's a need to create improved connections to the south and to 580 and 205, which are really the connections out of the region. And so there are some projects that I'm sure you're all familiar with that would address that on the highway side. And then lastly, as a segue into Rich's presentation, we see that there's tremendous potential to expand industrial development throughout the region in advanced manufacturing processes applied to some of our traditional industries and then some of our new and emerging industries. But that's going to require supporting infrastructure, new rail connections that take advantage of our rail mainline capacity but create new connections and short line opportunities to link to these new industries, improvements to State Route 4 that balance the needs of passenger and freight movement, and integration of goods movement with economic development initiatives, our priority development planning, and our development of green industries. And so I think that should be a good segue into Rich's presentation. I think what we're going to do is do that and then take questions at the end.
Thanks, Mike. And our presentations do pretty much go hand in glove, and appreciate the work that you put in here, Mike. And just so people understand, Cambridge Systematics was also involved in the Northern Waterfront initial study that was released back in January, and their work was very much appreciated. What is the Northern Waterfront? It's an economic development initiative, and it's a development initiative that was born from a vision of Contra Costa Supervisor Federal Glover. And as Supervisor Glover so aptly states, you know, the Northern Waterfront and the revitalization of the county's northern waterfront is vital to anyone concerned with economic development in Contra Costa County, as well as the entire Bay Area region. The initiative is constructed from many building blocks, but the cornerstone, and it's been discussed already tonight, is goods movement and regional collaboration. Those are the primary drivers of this initiative. You'll notice for the regional collaboration, the logos on the bottom of the slide, they represent the 6 cities and the counties along the northern waterfront. And we're extremely pleased to also include Contra Costa Transportation Authority as a major collaborator in this effort. The work that Randy, Ross, Martin have helped us with on this and just been outstanding, and we look forward to continuing the collaboration and working with your staff. And it'd be remiss not to also thank Peter, who's worked very hard on the ferry aspect of the northern waterfront as well. So thank you very much. Now, to put the northern waterfront in a little bit more context, if you take a look at the map at the top, it's going to run from Hercules to Oakley. The purple areas are the industrial zoned land. It's about 50 miles long. It's about 47 square miles, and the northern waterfront on its own contains 61% of Contra Costa's industrial zone land. As was reported in the workforce database and the MSI database, there's about 26,000 jobs or more that are tied to the northern waterfront. A third of those are manufacturing jobs, advanced manufacturing jobs. According to the Contra Costa Economic Partnership Study that was performed by Beacon Economics, 56% of people in Contra Costa County that go to work in the advanced manufacturing industries, businesses, commute outside of Contra Costa County to their jobs. we think it's a great opportunity to send these people to the northern waterfront. Be a great place for them to work. Be great for Contra Costa County. The northern waterfront, for dollar reasons, generates $21.6 billion in economic output, annual economic output. And that 21.6 represents a third of Contra Costa County's total. Very important area of the county, and that's why we want to revitalize its historic past. What is the primary objective along the northern waterfront? Well, it's to leverage what we consider the current assets to create an additional 18,000 jobs by the year 2035. It's not 180, it's 18,000. And we want these jobs adjacent to the existing workforce and the planned development areas. And pleased to say that we believe that CCTA feels the same way, that there needs to be more attention put on jobs in this area. So we talk about leveraging existing assets. If you look towards the bottom of your slide, you'll see what we've identified as 4 major existing assets. The first one being underutilized industrial land. There's a lot of vacant and underutilized industrial land in Contra Costa County, and in particular in the northern waterfront. The balance of the industrial land is basically in the Richmond area, the 39%, so you're looking at northern waterfront as a major player. The other 3 are very goods movement oriented. You have water access with deep water channels. 35 feet currently is the depth. As Mike pointed out, in the Baldwin Ship Channel, we'd love to get that deeper, make the payload a lot better for vessels coming up the river. There are existing marine terminals and wharfs there as well. And we have 2 Class 1 railroad lines, as Mike pointed out in his presentation, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe and the UP Railroad. You'll also notice, as Mike pointed out as well, in the shipping channel, we do have the Marine Highway 580. And we do believe that eventually that could become a player in the northern waterfront as well. When we took a look at what the northern waterfront, 8 manufacturing activity centers popped out at us. The 6 cities as well as some of the unincorporated areas. And so we started focusing, and if you look at it, they're along the Highway 4 corridor. Well, east-west, you've got Highway 4. Now we have Highway 80. There's Highway 680. And this is the jewel, if this happens, the tri-length. Because as Mike pointed out, we want to get to 205 and Highway 5. Because Highway 5 represents to us the backbone of the Pacific coast. Going Canada to Mexico. Be great. Now, we also want to point out, we don't want people just commuting through there. We want people to stop for their jobs there. That's not a commute lane. We want that to be a place of destination. So how are we going to do it? Well, Gary Kraft in his report pointed out seven areas, and we've added an 8th through our various community meetings. We've listened to folks, and Supervisor Glover very intently listened to the folks and agreed that we need to add the 8th, the quality of life. But the 8 we have now are the land use, business climate, and regulatory environment, infrastructure investment, development incentives and financing, regional branding and marketing, cluster development and innovation, business support services, workforce development, and then the quality of life. As tiring as that may have been to say or listen to, we have action teams that are being developed for each of those action areas, consisting of about 15 to 20 folks. The East Bay Leadership Council is chairing many of the action teams. We also have some folks from the Workforce Development Board. I know that Ross and Randy have said that they're very interested in participating. East Bay Economic Development Alliance is also going to be involved in the action teams, and it's a lot of building the information that we need to make this a go. And the way we're going to work this is the action teams are going to be developing issues, talking with private folks, talking with industry, talking with government agencies and special districts, And then that's going to come up to a private-public consortium where it's going to be further vetted, which will then come to a work group, which is comprised of the 6 cities as well as other agencies. And then we'll be coming back to the city councils and the Board of Supervisors with a strategic action plan to hopefully be adopted. And then that's when the rubber's really going to hit the road on this initiative. As McKinsey Global Institute points out, the role of policy and public policy in manufacturing is largely about enabling and creating an environment for competitive and innovative companies to flourish. And that's what we believe that these 8 areas are going to allow for people to take a look at the northern waterfront area and say, that's where we want to be, that's where we want our companies to grow and flourish. So with that, I thank you very much. I thank Contra Costa Transportation Authority for having us here, for your patience in listening to the presentation, and thank you for all your hard work. And we're here for answer any questions. Gary Kraft from the Kraft Consulting Group, the author of the report, is also here, who makes sure he fields all the tough questions. And we also have up here my contact information, as well as the site. To go, the internet site. If you go to that Northern Waterfront website, there's a lot of information. We're going to be putting the clips from the January 10th forum, which was attended, for those who weren't there, by about 400 people. A very lively and dynamic group of folks were there. We had various roundtable discussions. There's also an atlas there where there's just a encyclopedia of information and good stuff in the atlas. And we're hoping to get the clips of the forum itself put on there, as well as Gary's report will be on there, and any updates that we'll have along the way. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Mike?
Yeah, in your eight action areas, I was looking for something which suggested a concentration on regulatory regime, specifically those things in law and in policy, coming right down from Sacramento, that inhibit any kind of development. Because this is a massive undertaking here, and it seems to me there's a lot that can be done to enable this kind of redevelopment, if you will, by some different regulations. Would you comment on that?
That comment comes up frequently in a lot of the action team meetings that we've been having, particularly relative to CEQA, the 800-pound gorilla. And I know that there's some work being done at the state level with some public or with some local input. What we're trying to do with our initiative is to, well, let's first control what we can control, or at least have some influence on, and it's more the local policies, and to make sure that there's some unity and flexibility in what the various communities are showing folks outside of the community and people that may want to come to the northern waterfront. Because what we're seeing is that people, they really don't say, well, geez, we want to move to Hercules, or we want to move to Oakley. They'll say, well, we'd kind of like to be in the Bay Area, maybe in the sub-region of the area up around Concord, Walnut Creek, or the northern waterfront. So when a company looks at that, we want to make sure that our local policies are attractive in a way that everyone can live with, and that they're not looking at 7 different things that just fatigue people, and they don't look, they just stop. So yes, we understand that CEQA is the big issue, the big 800-pound gorilla, the elephant. We're tackling it more from a local jurisdiction side right now, but your question does come up frequently.
Gail.
I'm just wondering how the issue of rising sea levels, factors into your planning.
It's been identified in the Atlas. We're aware of it. We'd like to make other people aware of it. It's I wish we had the picture up to show you. It's kind of interesting, the areas that are affected according to statistics today. It's something that we're offering for folks to take a look at when they're making their decisions. It's not as, and Pat Roach is also here, and Pat's much more smart about these things than I am. And Pat, tell me if I say something wrong. It's not as, doesn't affect the northern waterfront quite as much as other places. Pat? Yeah.
I'm Pat Roach with Contra Costa County Department of Conservation and Development. When we prepared the atlas, which was presented at that January forum, we included a whole section on sea level rise, and we used the information that the Bay Conservation Development Commission of the state have been using in terms of the 2050 and the 2100 affect the potential sea level rise. So it is a factor in any planning effort along any portion of waterfront in the Bay Area. And we'll be working with the Bay Conservation Development Commission and the state as they move forward with their adaptation strategies for development along the waterfront.
Sure.
Thank you. I must say the forum in January was great. It was well put on, and there was a great deal of attendance there and a great deal of excitement about it. I'm glad to see you moving forward, and I'm pleased to see this sort of update. When do you plan to have the strategic action plan? What's your timeline?
We're shooting for the end of the year. As the action teams grow, because we continue to get more people interested in joining the action teams and calling all the time, it gets it's a little harder to get our arms around everything, so we're striving for the end of the year.
Good. I'll look forward
And I have my bosses sitting there, so.
They're going to keep you on task, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Julie.
Yeah, this is a question that actually came up because of a presentation I heard recently about the Air Board and their restrictions on where development takes place relative to proximity to highways and other modes of transportation. And it occurs to me that with the goods movement and increased traffic along the UP lines, among others, that this could be kind of a butting heads with one jurisdiction over another. And I'm 100% behind this. I think this is great. We've needed this for a long time. And as president of ABAG, I'm also working on the prosperity study. And this feeds right into providing good jobs for folks who need to move up out of very low wage jobs. So this is going to be good for all of us. But I am very concerned about how we deal with the challenges of the Air District's regulations when we're going about trying to create, especially manufacturing jobs.
That's a great point. And part of the beauty of the northern waterfront, we have several gems tucked away that may not face that issue because they're not that close to residential.
In the work that we're doing in the regional study, we are going to be looking at all of the major goods movement corridors throughout the region and looking at what the potential land use conflicts are to try to provide guidance to the cities. Of course, the cities really are the ones who are making these decisions to try to create buffers wherever possible. But then we're also going to be looking at mitigation strategies, and of course the Air Resources Board has its own sustainable goods movement initiative. We're very aware of some of the types of technology solutions that are being proposed, and we're going to be looking at where those fit in terms of low emission technologies wherever we can't create buffers and separations. So that's definitely part of the plan.
Federal.
Well, if there are not any other questions, I wanted to just comment that we're very thankful for CCTA and their participation in this whole effort. We know that this is a huge undertaking, but it's been a vision of mine for a number of years, and one that the Board of Supervisors has bought into. There's a number of action teams that are working very hard. We want to see more participation in those action teams. We look forward to working with those regulatory groups. Again, it's a major undertaking, but I think if we can get the type of partnership that we need, all working together, we're going to see success. It won't be tomorrow, but we will see that success come through. So we welcome all to participate in this process.
Thank you. Although I did have one last question. What type of activity and do you see for the UP line? I mean, that's as it rolls through eastern Contra Costa.
Well, this is a good question. It's been a relatively low level use line in the past, and I think the real wild card is all the plans for petroleum product movements. There are also some other issues related to just capacity constraints on the Central Corridor, the Capital Corridor line. But most of the plans that I've seen that would create alternatives for that would probably go down the Niles Canyon route and out that way. But I think they're really looking at all options. Their primary priority is preserving capacity on the Capital Corridor line, and I think that's where likely the battles are going to be the greatest in terms of just public-private conflicts. But we'll see.
You know, none of this works unless we have the transportation infrastructure that's needed to do the goods movement, whether we're talking about water, rail, roads, air. It doesn't make a difference. We need to look at all of those opportunities, and I think that the reason that this is so broad is that it opens the door for those opportunities to all be a part of it. We haven't talked a lot about our airways, but certainly that's another way of movement when we talk about transportation and the various corridors that we have for goods movement. And so we're going to be looking at that opportunity also when we think about the underutilized use of the Byron Airport, what we could do at Buchanan, and that's just major. We are a county that's been real reliant on rail for forever, but let's get the best use of that rail. I worked at Dow Chemical for a number of years, and I see what we can do with our movement of commodities through the water and being able to dredge those channels and getting them deep enough so that we can have more movements, bring in other business opportunities, not just the industries that's there today. So all the road work that CCTA has done is major for truck movement. So a lot of great opportunities awaits us.
I was just, if I could through the chair, I was just going to comment that this is exciting on a lot of levels, and transportation, I think, is the nexus to get the door open. But if you look at Boston had some of the worst looking harbor areas, waterfronts, and it is now something that's a partnership of all the things you're talking about here. The convention center was moved to the waterfront, the rail lines, the shipping lines. It's the most valuable property in Boston. And if you look at the touches that have happened, and even in Richmond, there are some very specific waterfront developments that have happened. So not only is there an opportunity here to solve how to connect those to make these beautiful places. I mean, we're in California, waterfront's the most premium spots, and we got some of the worst waterfronts, to be honest, on this corridor. They are just leftover, forgotten places. And if we solve transportation, that's great, but if we really solve to make those wonderful places to live and interact, I think we'll hit a home run. And
one of the things we also have, and we don't talk about it a lot, but one of the action teams is the marinas. Most of these communities all have marinas. And to be able to get those up and functioning in a way that will attract tourism to this area is going to be outstanding. We're going to be working very closely with East Bay Regional Park and looking at our recreational opportunities out there also.
Thank you. Russ?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, I'd just like to wrap it up and maybe talk about when we could hear again. So kind of working backwards with the northern waterfront, as you heard, we're very happy to be involved with the county and think it's very important towards what we're doing, particularly as we plan for 2016 to make sure some of those investments help create the jobs, enhance the waterfront, and do those sorts of things. Unfortunately, we submitted a planning grant application. Martin put a planning grant application together this spring to try to get some dollars to study this. Unfortunately, we were not successful on that, but we'll continue to do that to bring in these jobs and the infrastructure that the supervisor's talking about. Related to the overall schedule with the broader goods movement study, I'll bring back this schedule. So we're in the needs assessment right now, and probably towards the beginning of next year, where they'll be developing and evaluating strategies. If, with your permission, that might be the time to come back again and update you on where we are with that effort.
Oh, sure. Happy to. Well, first of all, I just wanted to join everybody in commending and thanking Supervisor Glover for Federal's leadership in bringing this all together. You know, when you think we've come a long way from shaping our future, when we heard East County is critical to the economic prosperity of Contra Costa County. We can't have a cul-de-sac. We need to develop the infrastructure and the jobs. So it's really exciting to see this coming and the resources and everybody who's involved in it. And also tonight hearing how Contra Costa's freight movement efforts are going to be part of the regional plan in developing the priorities for the region. And I think a couple of things. One, that having them integrated is really critical. It's staggering when you see that 30% of our jobs in Contra Costa County are related to goods movement in some way. The other thing, Julie mentioned one of the studies. I wanted to follow up. MTC is involved in a follow-on study to Plan Bay Area relative to the economic impacts of it and job development. And I'm thinking this would be a good opportunity for us to make sure that this initiative is really a key part of that discussion in terms of because part of that whole plan is sustainability, is providing transportation, housing, but also jobs. And that was the one piece that was not as robust, and we've come back with the Bay Area Council. I know that the East Bay Leadership Council is involved in it, and to put together this plan. So I think the information you're putting together, the plan, would be really important to include in that, so we can be assured that Contra Costa will be front and center when we start looking at, okay, now we've got the plan, how do we allocate the resources? Because there's a paucity of areas like East County where you have the water, you have a historic industrial base where jobs can go. And I would also encourage, I think the East Bay Regional Park District has been an incredible partner with Contra Costa in helping us achieve a lot of these goals. And I think it would be helpful, too, for us to be working with the other regional agencies like the Air District as well as BCDC to say, hey, this is a huge opportunity because they are also invested in the whole idea of sustainability and the economic viability. So I just think this is really exciting, and the way it all flows together, I think we have a huge opportunity. So thank you all so much. And again, thank you to Federal for your leadership in bringing all of us together and all the cities and the county together on this.
Moving on to 4.0 regular agenda, 4A13, public hearing for fiscal year 2014-15 proposed budget for the authority.
My name is Brian Kelleher. I'm the finance manager. We presented the capital budget and operating budget to the APC on June 5th. The total expenditure plan is $278.9 million, which is an increase of $14.6 million over the adopted fiscal year 2013-14 operating budget. The variation from year to year is dependent upon the timing of several marquee capital projects. The next few slides will give an overview and an explanation to the proposed budget. This slide represents the snapshot of the revenue and expenditure categories to be covered. The revenue sources include sales tax revenues, federal, state, local funds, investments, the bonds and other sources. The expenditure plan is for the individual divisions, projects, programs, planning, administration, and debt service. The authority remains to have a balanced budget, and the significant changes are a reflection of the current capital project and program projections. As we increase budget projections for capital projects, the revenue projections are increased accordingly, whereas increases in program expenditures are contributions to cities for the completion of transportation for livable communities project grants and increased payments to programs outlined in the strategic plan. This slide shows the historical sales tax revenue in blue, with $61.5 million in 2010, and steady increases over the last several years. The original budget for fiscal year 2014 was approved at $75.4 million. Current projections show that we should see an increase of 2% over the fiscal year 2013 revenue receipts. We have estimated an increase of 2.5% to $78.2 million for fiscal year 15, as receipts for sales tax show continued growth in auto, retail, restaurants, and construction. This slide is for informational purposes to illustrate the dramatic increases of federal, state, and local grants and contributions received by the authority from other cities and other sources. However, this slide only captures revenues that flow directly through CCTA. The vast majority of the state and federal grants are used on our state highway projects and are accessed directly by Caltrans. Consequently, the actual leveraging is significantly greater than what our revenues show. For revenues received by the authority, sales tax revenues have increased 27% since 2010, whereas revenues from federal, state, and local grants have increased 456%. Capital project grant revenues reflect a decrease of $18.1 million to $75 million. The RM2 funding is decreasing $20.6 million as the Caldecott is wrapping up. The increase of $9.9 million of BATA funds and the decrease of $13.6 million is attributable to the construction phases related to East County Corridor project. Moreover, the drop in grant revenue is a timing of projects, not because we have lost any grant funding. Several other projects saw reductions or increases based on the timing of expenditures related to the project. Overall, $75 million in grant funds is a great demonstration to the work done by the authority to secure federal, state, and local funds for the construction of infrastructure in the county, in addition to the funds earmarked through the sales tax measure. The proposed fiscal year 14-15 expenditures of $278.9 million. Project expenditures increased $4.8 million to $187.3 million due to the phases of projects. The Caldecott Tunnel decreased $30.3 million. BART East Contra Costa Rail Extension increased $23.6 million. State Route 4 Corridor reduced $7 million. I-80 Corridor increased $5.1 million. And then some of the major streets, traffic flow, safety capacity improvements are Kirker Pass, Geary Road, Camino Pablo Pavement, Clayton Road, Treat Boulevard, and Alhambra Creek. This slide here shows the top 5 capital projects that we have listed. The East County Corridors has $37.7 million. BART East County Rail Extension, $36 million. Caldecott Tunnel, $24.4 million. SR 4 East Widening, $19.2 million. Sub-regional street improvements are some of the ones that we've already mentioned. The proposed expenditures for administration, programs, and planning. The administration is $2.1 million. We only show a $20,000 increase from 13-14. Salaries and benefits are $0.6 million and represent 0.82%, which is below the 1% limitation established by Measure J. Programs, $54.8 million, have increased $8.4 million from fiscal year 13-14. The reason for this is the timing of projects that are related to the TLC and the pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities. Several of these projects are the Richmond Transit Village Phase 2, Central Concord pedestrian improvements and streetscape project, Bay Trail gap closure, San Pablo Dam Road pedestrian improvements, Northwest Walnut Creek pedestrian and bicycle access, Downtown Danville multimodal access improvements, San Ramon Valley Iron Horse Trail bicycle pedestrian overcrossings, and several projects from the East Bay Regional Parks District, Richmond Transit Village, and the Martinez to Crockett segment, SF Bay Trail. The Planning Department has a budget of $6.2 million, increased $1.3 million from 13-14, as the Planning Department continues to work on the County Transportation Plan update, the Priority Development Area investment growth. We also have an increase of $200,000 for the SR4 corridor as matching funds to leverage grants and augment programs and studies related to the Integrated Corridor Management Implementation, Connected Vehicle Pilot Program. And then per the Planning Commission and APC direction, they had asked to provide adequate budget for the public education and outreach plan through the end of the fiscal year. As such, staff has increased the budget for Gray Bowen from $400,000 to $1.2 million. Debt service for the Measure J 2012 bonds remains at $28.5 million. In the next year, we hope to begin working on the $74 to $100 million of new bonds for 2015 capital projects as needed. In conclusion, sales tax revenues continue to show growth year over year, and grant funding for projects are increasing as well. Expenditures for projects year over year are increasing as the authority is securing additional funding for larger scale projects. Staff is available for questions as needed.
Questions of staff at this time?
Well, first of all, thank you for a very short, concise budget, considering how big the numbers are. You didn't highlight, which I think is really a great asset, is really about the management changes and how we're going to go forward. I think that's a really important function. But could you just explain, and I know it's just an accounting issue because you can see one line that's all positive numbers, the next line below it. Are we just doing a new accounting code? This is on page 481316. And this is just on the last item you touched on, Measure J, Debt Service Fund. It looks like we're rolling one line to give it a new title. So you got Measure J Debt Service Fund, and then right below it, Measure J Debt Service Fund. And one is
the $105 million that you see
no, the
listed there?
56.9. You know, what are we doing there? We're duplicating a line with a slightly different title. So it's page
the two above it on the same.
4A1316. And if you go under financing sources, you go down 1, 2, 3.
You are
4,
correct.
5,
That is, I'll take ownership on that one. As we're reading that, the numbers should be positive and negative, which would pretty much would show the net difference of $25,000 between the debt service paid in 13-14, the current year that we're in right now, is about $28.5 million, and then the debt service we'll pay next year is $28.49. So it's a transposition of having them in the wrong line, which I will
because they don't
correct.
the second one doesn't total.
Yes, because if you see to the far right, there's a negative $56 million and a positive 56.
Right.
It should show the actual difference between the two numbers that are in the column amended as of March 2014.
Right.
It should show the difference between the 28,466 and the 28,495.
Okay.
so I apologize for that.
Great. And then also, how does that break down? That number in that $56 million, what is it that it really?
The $56 million is not the amount that we're paying in debt service. It's the $28 million. You're looking for the
Okay,
the break.
That's the number I couldn't resolve. So it is
Okay.
28 million, 28.5 million.
Correct. We have $12 million in principal payments, and then we have $16.4 million in interest payments.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. No other questions.
Any additional questions of staff? Not before we vote. I have a speaker card. Mr. Ralph Hoffman.
Ralph Hoffman again. I'm now a Creeker, but early in my career, I worked in the Houston area for companies like Monsanto and Gulf Oil and Chevron, and I'm quite familiar with Galveston Island. We used to have a phrase, Lord willing, and to paraphrase it, and the bay don't rise. Tomorrow, coincidentally, is Juneteenth, and I'm quite familiar with Juneteenth because I spent a lot of time on Galveston Island. But I also know that tomorrow is Dump the Pump Day. Quite simply, we need more Measure J funding, maybe doubling the tax on that we get for Measure J funds, and a lot of it devoted to bus transportation. Of course, we need road infrastructure as well. There are quite a number of areas in the county, Ignacio Valley Road, Kirker Pass, and a good part of I-680 that simply can't be widened. The only way to improve reduce the congestion there, quite simply, is to dump the pump. And I would urge more funding for bus systems in this county. Thank you.
I'd be willing to make a motion.
I'll second.
Actually, the motion, I said I'd willingly make it. I would move that we accept our budget with the following clarifications on page 4A1316 to fix those numbers. It's also the same thing on 4A13-20. Those numbers, it's also the same ones that are duplicated, and those totals need to balance back out.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a first by Newell, second by Sherry.
Just to clarify for the record, that the motion would be adoption of Resolution 14-32-A.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Engel, CCTA staff. This item before you tonight is to release a ferry feasibility financial study that was done by EPS in cooperation with a working group that was put together. Just want to mention how CCTA got involved in this project is there was what appeared to be in the newspaper some miscommunication or misunderstanding of kind of what the numbers were out there. There was lots of numbers being thrown around, and CCTA put together a working group that was made up of the stakeholders that are listed in your staff report on 4B12-3. So you can see everybody that was involved in that. After the second meeting of the working group, and the working group did include WIDA staff starting with the second meeting, it was apparent that there was a necessity to kind of pull all the information together. So that's basically what this report is. It's a pulling together of existing information. The capital dollars that you see in the report are engineering studies, concept designs that were done previously, and those were just brought forward. So those numbers are a few years old. They certainly don't reflect any escalation of costs that would occur at the time these facilities could be built. So I just wanted to point that out. I think another thing that we found out, and Walter Kieser will go into a little bit more detail on this, is that the study is really just looking at, it's a financial feasibility study looking basically at the potential operating costs of these 4 expansion services. And it's looking at a common metric in transit, which is fare box recovery. So are these services, or do they have the potential to meet the fare box recovery target that WETA uses, and the typical fare box recovery that MTC has as part of its RM2 funding program, which is the primary source of funds that WETA uses to operate these ferry services. So as a part of this study, what we found was there's a lot more questions out there that should be answered. There's potentially more studies that could be done to look at very specific programs. It just wasn't in the budget or in the scope of this particular report. And there's lots of policy decisions that still would need to be made as looking at these ferry services go on. So I wanted you to have that in mind as you listen to Walter's report on the progress of the study or what occurred in the study.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Walter Kieser. I'm Senior Principal with Economic and Planning Systems. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and it's always difficult to be the economist at the end of 4 hours of your meeting. Why do you save economics for last? I mean, sorry about that. That wasn't my intention. We have published this report, which I hope you all have a chance to take a look at. As Peter said, it is an accumulation of information and analysis we've conducted. I think Peter's done a good job of identifying the study objectives. I won't go any further, save to say that this study is really a beginning of a process. It really sets a platform for looking into these points of additional study and policy questions for you in your deliberations going forward. The routes that we're looking at include Richmond, Hercules, Martinez, and Antioch. During the course of the study, it became clear that we should look at some quote-unquote intertide services, and so we did back to square one effectively and did a bunch more work on that to try and understand what would be the impact of routes that stopped along the way, basically. The key thing about these new ferry routes is that they're not all equal going in. Richmond and Hercules in particular are unique in the sense that Richmond's is already in the short-range transit plan for WETA, and Hercules, along with Hercules, are both included in MTC's Resolution 3434. So because of that, they basically are prioritized for some funding at this point, just going into this study effort. Basically, our study approach, as Peter said, involves assembling this working group. The working group from the cities were very helpful. We worked with them directly, both gathering information, reviewing drafts of the report, and these sorts of things. So we had, I think, a good working relationship. And, of course, we want to thank WETA's staff for their involvement, providing a lot of information upon which this report was based. Key assumptions about this include this notion of ridership, how many people are going to ride this service, and we relied on the Cambridge Systematics projections that WETA had developed, and then we updated as a part of this study. We made assumptions about fares. Of course, those fares are implied by the ridership projections. You can only charge so much. The routes and levels of service were worked out through WETA's experience establishing these kinds of ferry services, and then all the operating costs are based upon actual working experience of WETA at this point. Again, the key thing here is that what we've really done is identified a series of policy considerations as far going forward, and that's why this is a beginning. Current and how funding sources will be allocated, how the services might be prioritized, which first, second. Looking into the economic impacts, like what you just heard about the northern waterfront, how ferry service might influence some of those considerations and be an investment like the others that have been discussed. This issue of emergency services, alternative technologies, this topic of deciding whether you can go with these direct routes or these intertide, and of course, last but not least, what role CCTA may have in this, which heretofore you have not had. So those are all considerations for you going forward on the basis of this work. Really quickly on operating funding, basically the ferry service in the bay now comes from fare boxes and from RM2 monies. By the way, that RM2 money was also what funded a portion of largely the Caldecott Tunnel. But a portion of the RM2 monies, which is basically the bridge tolls, is used to fund WIDA. There's also some local tax dollars on the Bay Farm Island Run. So that's basically where the money comes from. I should just say a couple things. This fare box revenue basically represents this metric that we use is how much the fare box, that is how much fares pay relative to the total operating cost of the run. Okay? The RM2 funds, an important thing to say about that is that those monies, because they're bridge toll, they come from bridge tolls, are shown not to be increasing over time. They basically are flat and allocated to existing services. There's not a lot of extra money there at this point for expansion services. It's pretty much committed to those existing services. This is just quickly on the ridership. You can see the numbers of riders that would be on the different ferries. Richmond at the largest amount. It's the shortest run, and it has the most direct economic link to San Francisco, so that would make sense. The others are considerably smaller on a daily basis. The charts over on the right reflect the ridership of the intertide services, and I won't go into detail because I would really put you to sleep then, so I can answer questions that you may have about those if you'd like. Basically, this chart shows the operating, the levels of fare box revenue for the different routes set against the capital, the operating costs accumulated over a 10-year period. So for Richmond, that number would be $35 million, 44% of which would come from fare box on the one spectrum, and at Martinez at the other high end, it would be $69 million with only 12% coming from fare boxes. Antioch and the intertide routes are shown there as well. The reason why the intertide routes are considerably more is because of the additional service that would be involved in providing those services. This chart basically shows those fare box recoveries as compared to the existing WIDA ferry routes. And you can see that the system-wide average is 46%. A minimum that WIDA and MTC sets for funding ferry services 40%, and all but Richmond of the expansion services fall considerably below that number. This chart shows the capital costs both for the terminal and vehicle purchase, both substantial investments that would need to be made. I should note that the Hercules numbers here, that 20 to 35, does not include any information, or because none exists, for any cost savings that might come from a relocation of the terminal. But in any case, we're looking at considerable financial investment in order to get these services going. Basically, at this point, staff is recommending that you accept this report and take it, as I said at the start of the presentation, a basis for further analysis and study about these new ferry expansion services. Thank you.
No.
I would just make a comment. First of all, thank you for the report. That's really concise. It's too bad, but it's not unexpected that given that the waterfront development we were talking about earlier has not really occurred other than the Richmond area, it's something that I think this should continue on, and as the efforts go to develop those waterfronts and revitalize those, that I think the subject will begin to reveal itself as positive economic growth occurs out there. But it's pretty hard to get people, just intuitively, to get them out to those areas. But boy, I think the Richmond one is going to be win. And who knows if Hercules is right behind that might work. But yeah. Thank you for the report.
Water, this nice report, and I wouldn't recommend it as bedside reading, but it certainly was interesting. It was very interesting. Thank you for not reciting the whole thing. Yeah. There's a burning question that I had, and I suppose if it was anybody else than you, I probably wouldn't ask the question, but I know you'd have something to say about it. What you've done is based your operating cost on the existing operating model, which I guess means the Vallejo Ferry.
The Vallejo Ferry and the other lines
And-
that
and
we
the other
operate.
Oakland- the
Yeah,
other
the
Oakland,
Oakland,
yeah.
Alameda,
Right.
and South San Francisco.
Okay, so the existing, okay. I don't know anything about how that's operated. I have no basis for commenting one way or another on it. But I would ask, if operating cost is probably being driven largely, well, one by fuel and two by labor. And so the question I'd ask, I used to ride the Crowley tugs over from Tiburon, and boy, they were cheap. They were slow, but they were cheap, and they always ran. There were any strikes. It was great. You could always rely on it. And so the question I would ask is, are there alternative operating models? Because clearly, the only one that's going to make it here is the Richmond line. If you're going with a 40% fare box recovery, the rest of them are just disappointing. To I guess that's the only word I can come up with. To be polite, it's disappointing that they're so low, particularly Hercules, because it strikes me that Hercules is such a natural for water transport. And for that matter, so is Martinez, and you can stretch it and say, well, so would Antioch. And once Federal's dream comes true, I think you're going to find a lot of desire to have water transport. So, we're really at the first, getting this thing going. So I'd hate to see it die because the economics are so bad. So the question is, you got any comments for us at this point on maybe alternative operating models which might drive the denominator of the cost recovery factor down?
Well, the one that perhaps we, the staff, could make mention of that. I mean, one possibility you talk about the Crowley service would be looking at some private operations of some sort as maybe for starters. I think it's worth looking into. I mean, mind you that these costs that we use were not luxury services. These are kind of bare bones commuter kind of services. I don't think there's a lot of cost savings that could be achieved under a public operating model for all the reasons that you've mentioned. But perhaps there's some way of reducing costs through some private. But the private is going to face, without subsidies, is going to face a real problem. Of course, that Crowley service worked because they could basically provide that service to tourists right when they wanted to drive, and they had a mile across the Raccoon Strait, not 40 miles from Antioch. So it's hard. That's going to be a hard one, so perhaps something to look into.
Thank you for your study, but I just wonder how can you project, the ridership when there's still no ferry there? Only Richmond has, and you could project that out. But for, like, let's say, Antioch has already, but Martinez and Hercules, how did you project that? I mean, I know you said a Cambridge study.
Right. Well, first of all, yes, I would first say that I did not.
Okay, whoever did it.
but we did have some. But that being said, we relied upon a model prepared by Cambridge Systematics, and we did conduct effectively peer review. So we do have some understanding of how this is done. And basically, this is like any other quote unquote travel demand model in which you're looking at how many people want to go from point A to point B, the various modes that they have to get there, and then these times that are involved. And then there's a statistical model applied, which basically says that runs through all of that and says, well, given all of those variables, how many people might pay $9 or $10 or whatever it is to get on a ferry and spend 90 minutes or more going from Antioch to San Francisco. And so as versus getting in their car or getting on BART or these other alternatives. Yes, yeah. So it's a complicated model, but one that is rational relative to people's travel behavior, and these models are calibrated to actual experience. So it is, I think, reasonably reliable given what we're doing right now.
Yeah, so you're saying that right now it doesn't look feasible, basically, because the recovery should be 46%?
That is correct. And again, the
But it could change?
Excuse me?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Some things with the basic travel relationships aren't going to change much. They're already the basic systems are in place largely, and all of those things. So it's hard to say what would make that alter that model. That could be a question for future study to say, well, exactly where's the soft spot? How might we improve that ridership? Clearly, looking at that economics work, we've worked obviously in some of these cities and looking at infill development in Antioch and Martinez and such, where you have a higher population concentration than you currently are planning for, could have some influence on ridership, just as one example.
Because like the Lynx bus alone is like 800 to 1,000 passengers a day.
That's correct.
So,
yeah.
So this seems pretty low, you know. But maybe because you said the fare might be different and the time and
right, and the Lynx bus is the travel
Express.
patterns are completely different.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, I'm not familiar with the Cambridge model. Does it look at local land use or planned development or any economic growth? I was also a little surprised by the numbers, both for Martinez and for Hercules, as they represent, their proximity to Highway 4 and 80, which are highly congested areas. You would anticipate that you might see some benefit from that, but if the model doesn't incorporate that and only really looks at local land use, then that would be something that might be of issue.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty certain that the model does incorporate forecasts, including the recent ABAG forecast. So it is looking in the future. It's not just a current estimate. Number one, and number two, it relative to that topic of congestion and such, it takes that into effect too. It's calculating time delays in the peak hour, so it is taking that into account. Whether it does that perfectly or not is another question, and whether there may be opportunities for increasing that ridership one way or the other is an open question. But the model does take both of those factors into account.
Okay, because we've looked at studies. I said on WCTAC as well, and the congestion on 80 in particular is scheduled to rise quite a bit over the next 10 years. And as Myrna has pointed out, the Lynx bus has like 900 and something, has shown great growth over the past few years, and I would think that people would be looking for other opportunities for other modalities as well. And then there was also the question of some of the capital costs are a little old. And, I think this is a great framework for study. You have adjusted numbers as well, which make none of them look good, which would suggest a range.
Right.
And, kind of looking at this more as a regional and long-term level, I think for Contra Costa County has 4 sites proposed for ferries. But what we need to do is Ferry A needs to be successful.
Right.
Ferry A needs to be the right time, the right place, whether it's this year, next year, or 3 years from now. We need to make sure that the numbers, the capital costs, and everything is in place. Because if we want more ferry systems, we have to have the first one be very successful.
Right.
And so I think that this is a framework, but more work needs to be done to ensure that we have accurate numbers, both on the capital side and the ridership side, to reflect current economic development, including the Northern Waterfront Initiative, potential ridership in these areas, both in the short term and the long term, and any delays in projects that have occurred due to whatever.
Yes.
And so that's what I would urge that to happen before we move forward with any policy or financial decisions.
Right, and that speaks to the last point I made about CCTA's role in kind of putting all these pieces together, and that suggests some kind of monitoring. The report provides a framework that you can return to and say what's changed. And then how might that affect your decisions about your own funding decisions and those sorts of things? So, yeah.
Yeah, back when I was a resident of Marin, if you can believe that, I rode the Larkspur ferries but that wasn't when I first got there. It was after they were building them, and there was a lot of consternation. It was a Golden Gate, Transit or Transportation District, what do they call themselves? And there was a lot of consternation about whether there was going to be ridership and so forth. And I recall that being a singularly delightful experience riding on those ferries. It was pretty good. It was a lot better than Crowley because it went faster and it was on time. And every now and then there was a strike. But the point is that there was ridership, and I was wondering if you could comment on that was a long time ago. The ridership has it been robust? Is it growing in Larkspur?
Yes, those are expensive services, but their ridership is probably around 50%. Or their fare box recovery, I should say, and the balance is subsidized by the Golden Gate Bridge fare box tolls. So
50%.
It's a different service from WITA.
Yeah.
So it's completely different, but it has a steady ridership. It grew rather quickly when it first went into service, and it has a steady ridership based upon a fairly stable relationship between employment in Southern Marin and San Francisco, and so it's a stable service. Yeah.
Well, one would ask, and this gets to Myrna's question. Is there the ridership? Well, are there parallels here between the Larkspur service, which is now in its 20th year?
Oh,
easily. Are you 25 years? God, is that long?
30
oh,
years.
Dear.
30 years, 35.
It gets worse. Are there parallels in the lesson there?
The key difference that I would see, with perhaps the exception of Richmond and Hercules, you don't have the tight relationship of labor force and employment. You don't have quite that percentage. Very significant percentage of workforce in Southern Marin is commuting into the city. So it's a substantial commute corridor. Whereas you don't have that same kind of high percentage of labor force relationship between East County and San Francisco. It just doesn't exist, and I don't think it will. So that's one of the limits. That's one of the differences between those two situations.
As Sherry said, this is a good framework to start from, but one of the things that I found missing in the capital improvement program was access. How are people going to get there? Are there parking lots? None of that's addressed there, and it doesn't work unless there's some place for people to access. So I think for a future study, that would be an important ingredient that had to be added.
Yes.
The other piece that I think would be important is the cost per passenger. You have the ridership, but when you're comparing the use of public funds to other options, what is the cost per passenger? I thought that was lacking in here too.
Okay. One of the issues about that metric is that it can be, first of all, it will be a big number.
I know that.
And we already gave you some big numbers. But secondly, it's not oftentimes it's not a common for various reasons. It's not commonly used for doing this kind of analysis. Just as an example of that, while BART may have a cost recovery of 50% or so overall.
70%.
So, yeah, very high. But certain lines, like Pittsburgh, is far beneath that. So
not Pittsburgh.
So it's a little hard to use that, and sometimes a bit unfair. So.
David. We did have a fairly thorough, I think, thoughtful conversation about some of these same issues at Transpac. And I do think when this comes back for the next round, there are a series of questions that we asked about things like cost per passenger and so on that would be helpful, even with due respect to the notion that it's not particularly useful as a metric in some sense. It is to others in a different sense. And while BART's cost recovery is in the 70%, I know the bus system is a lot lower. It's just a data point and informational item for folks. And one of the other things we talked about at Transpac, of course, is the interlinked routes, if you will, or interlined routes. I would expect there certainly would be more person movement using the ferry from, say, Antioch to Martinez, with the county seat being there, than there would be from Antioch to San Francisco. And so I would be particularly, shall we say, distressed if there was a lot of focus put on studying routes from Antioch to San Francisco. It's a 90 to 120-minute ride just on the ferry, without even talking about how people are getting there or getting from where they get off in San Francisco. That just doesn't seem like a real rational commute alternative. But for some of those intermediary trips, I think that's money well spent.
If there are no other questions, I have two speakers. Speaker card. I'll open the public hearing, and Jordan DeSabler.
Good evening. I'm Jordan DeSabler, and I'm a resident of the Point Richmond district of Richmond. And I just want to say that I strongly support the idea of restoring ferry service between Richmond and San Francisco. I would definitely take it. Likewise, I want to emphasize that the San Francisco Bay, prior to the advent of the bridges, as most of you know, was had the busiest ferry system in the world. And the Bay represents so many opportunities for communities to come together to really enjoy traveling on the Bay. It's the ultimate freeway. It represents minimal infrastructure when you think about it. I mean, you're just a few boats and a few docks here and there. But, compared to rail, airplanes, freeways, et cetera, it's nothing. And I'd really like to stress that there's so many potentials for interline service, not to San Francisco, as was just pointed out, but between all the communities in Contra Costa County. I've taken the bus from Point Richmond over to Larkspur to take the ferry into San Francisco. That's how much I enjoy that. But I would gladly take the ferry from Richmond to Martinez, to Hercules, Antioch. Why the hell not? I mean, there's a lot to see and do in these communities, and why not explore them? You could take the ferry from one of our communities over to Larkspur, catch the SMART train, which is being developed, and get up to the wine country, or Santa Rosa. You could likewise get off a Capital Quarter train from Sacramento and transfer at Hercules to a boat and get into San Francisco. Why do you have to go to Emeryville and then get on a bus and then be stuck in traffic? I mean, think about it. There's a lot of potential out there. And I know this scope of this project is just for the weekday, but what about the weekends? When I was a boy growing up in Berkeley in the 70s, we used to take the ferry boat on the weekends to Angel Island directly from Berkeley. It was full. And we spent the whole day biking, swimming, come back on the evening boat. Great day. They stopped it. I've never heard peep. And there's a boat dock on the east side of Angel Island that's empty to this day. So I just want to urge you guys as members, active members in your constituencies and agencies, to work with the cities and the communities to really, let's think big rather than just commuting into San Francisco, which is great, but there are other things. So thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm James Paquette. I'm also from Point Richmond. I moved there about a year ago, and I wanted to come here and express to all of you how enthusiastic my wife and I would be for a ferry. We talked to our neighbors about this before I came out here today, and they were all very enthusiastic for it. I can assure you that my wife and I would be 4 of your daily boardings from your presentation. But that's not the only reason why I'm passionate about this project and passionate enough to come out here and really ask you to consider this very seriously and try and move it along quickly. If you look at where this ferry would land, it's ideal. It has plenty of available parking around it. It's near 580 and can be accessed by people throughout the northern East Bay area. But beyond all of that, if you look at where ferry terminals have been installed previously, so in parts of Alameda or the Larkspur ferry, which I've driven over the bridge and taken into work myself, you see real development and tremendous community improvement. And I think that if you look at cutting the boulevard that it would be right off of, and the way that Point Richmond is a little bit separated from the rest of Richmond by this stretch of industrial use, I think that this would really give a reason to develop that area with commercial uses, with retail uses, and draw people out of the city out to Richmond. I think it has incredible potential to impact this community in a very material way. And so I hope that this can be studied very rapidly and put into effect as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
I'll move the item.
Speaker, okay, there we go. 7.0, commissioners and staff comments. Chair, any comments?
That's you.
That's me, I know. I'm looking. I looked over.
Yes, he does. No, he doesn't.
No, I don't. Commissioners, any comments? Mary. I'm not Mary.
Oh, wow.
I won't tell her that.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to report out that on Monday, I attended on your behalf, as your delegate, the California Council of Governments board meeting in Sacramento. Amy was there as well on behalf of MTC, but as your delegate and as the first vice president of CalCog, we had a good meeting. We started with an update from Assemblywoman Bonnie Lowenthal, who said to us as the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, we need to do more to brag about our transportation successes because we need to get the public to be aware of what we're doing and why they need to fund us. And so she knew she was preaching to the choir, but she was reminding us of the importance of tooting our own horn, and certainly that's something we're doing here and trying to do better to educate the public about all we're trying to do with their treasured tax dollars. We had anticipated having a few other members of our legislative delegation there. However, that was the day after the passing of the budget, and they were in the process of electing the new Senate pro tem at the hour that we had set aside to have visitors. They chose to be there instead for some reason. A lot of our discussions centered around the cap and trade advocacy effort, as was noted by Randy in his executive director's report. Bill Higgins, our executive director for CalCog, has been working on this effort, interacting on a daily, hourly basis on the cap and trade advocacy. And one of the things that I found interesting is while the League and CSAC are all working together with CalCog in this effort and in an aligned focus along with the Self-Help Counties Coalition and with the California Alliance for Jobs, among others, and jointly funding the advocacy as well. What was interesting was that the League and CSAC are primarily focused on dealing with the legislators, and Bill, on our behalf, was primarily interacting with the agencies of Sacramento itself, and with the folks in the governor's office, among others, and the Strategic Growth Council and things like that. And they were calling him directly for updates and inviting him into their government offices rather than into the legislative offices. So it was a good tag team to work on getting money, and we actually wound up getting a little more than we thought we might get. So that's a good thing. Our lunch speaker was Paul Mitchell, who is a political data person and had lots of interesting tales about various races around the state, as well as the impacts of redistricting and things like that. He was telling us about how some of that was going through. Our business meeting in the afternoon focused primarily on the work program for our next year, a little bit of the state and federal legislative update, and then our work program budget and the dues for next year. The budget has increased. The board has asked for a few extra things to be done. Most agencies have had their budgets go up. However, even though the overall budget has grown, because we have been successful in convincing several of our other self-help counties in the Bay Area to participate, and because of the way the dues are structured, we divide the total Bay Area population with MTC and ABAG and each of the individual self-help counties who are also members, and it's appropriately reduced, so our dues actually go down this year, even though we're going to get more in services. So I thought that was pretty cool. We did decide that even though we are technically not a Brown Act agency, we are a 501c3, we fall in the cracks between a 501c3 and a technical Brown Act agency because we don't actually make decisions on behalf of any legislative organization. So we have decided that for all intents and purposes, we are going to do our best to abide by the Brown Act in the interest of transparency. But because we are a statewide organization, it's very hard to get people together to vote in one room on issues. So we will conduct several of our meetings on a conference call basis in order to get updated advocacy decisions and things like that. We are talking about restructuring somewhat. Primarily, we are councils of governments such as MTC, ABAG, SANDAG, SCAG, those kinds of big groups around the state, but also self-help transportation organizations. But we also have Western Riverside Council of Governments. Orange County has a council of governments separate from their transportation agency that is interested in joining and becoming part of this organization that is advocating for all of us in the kinds of work that we're doing. And so we're looking at perhaps having a new dues level for some of them based on their budgets, which are considerably lower than some of the rest of us. The more people we can get on board helping to push in the same direction will help a lot. So we're planning on this fall doing a strategic planning meeting to lay out where we want to go, but we are becoming increasingly, again, an advocacy organization working on behalf of our members. If there is any dissension within the ranks or disagreement, we do not take a position. We leave that to our individual members. It must be nearly unanimous for us to agree to become advocates. So we're watching that very, very carefully because 5 years ago it was close to implosion and the agency almost disappeared altogether. And that was actually over the vehicle registration fee argument, and it was a north-south split. And it just about blew up the entire organization. So we went back to no advocacy at all, and now we're gradually becoming much stronger in that. But we have, among our bylaws, an agreement that we will not take a position unless we all agree. So that's my update, and we're going forward. I am, as I said, the first vice president. I will be president come November because the current president is not running for re-election.
Thank you. Neil.
Speaking of advocacy, first of all, this is a great document. This is, who did this? Thank you, Lindsay. But it also highlights something. This picture is the tunnel I paid for. Do you notice how bright the lights are?
Mm-hmm.
This is the tunnel that we're getting. And this is a fake photograph. Turn the lights on. I went through there Saturday morning again, People put their, it's causing people to slow down. Third of the way through the tunnel, they're turning the lights off. It goes absolutely dark, then it goes back to light. This is in the new board. This is what it looked like for months. People can drive the speed limit through there. I know I mentioned this to Randy. They got to turn the lights on. And they do it a third of the way through. It'll be bright, and then it goes dark, and you see a wall of red lights going on, and the people doing it. Get the lights back on. It's a beautiful tunnel. Thank you. Give me the remote control. I'll fix it. Anyway, it's still, this is a great, my real point is, but boy, does that illustrate the photographs.
Any other comments? Janet?
I have a report, actually, on on May 22nd, I went up to Sacramento and along with a number of other people here attended the 25th annual California Transportation Foundation Transportation Awards winner, and I just have to say, as I think maybe has been stated before, but it's worth restating, that the project of the year was the Caldecott Tunnel. Lights on, okay. And I won't mention all the other winners, but we in the Bay Area were very prominent in that list several times. The San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge East Span replacement received special recognition. I believe, Amy, you were there. Along with, I know Kevin was there, and I can't remember all of who else was there.
Karen was there.
Thank you. That's right. I remember that. It's a little hard after almost a month. The pedestrian bicycle project of the year was the San Francisco Bay Area Rideshare Program. And the Devil's Slide Tunnel project won Conventional State Highway Project of the Year, and it's Caltrans District 4, so we might as well claim that too, right? And let's see, I think that may be the completion of the list, but I'm not sure how many Caltrans districts there are in the state. Maybe how many? 12. So you heard how many of the awards I mentioned. So we did really, really well this year, and it was really wonderful to be there and see how well we did, and especially how CCTA did at the statewide level this year. And thank you to all who were involved in that process. And I guess we can't expect it every year, but we can? Okay, next year. Right. Exactly.
Any other comments? Mike?
Yeah, I was really sad to read the message from Randy about Brad back in his encounter with the vehicle. Can you give us a brief update on his condition? For that matter, can you tell us a little bit how Mala's doing?
About the milestone?
Mala.
Oh.
You know, Christopher's colleague?
You want to talk about Mala?
Briefly, I won't reveal all the details, but she's on bed rest in the hospital and sitting tight, and I've talked to her on occasion, and she sounds a little bored, actually. So I think she wants to get back to work. She's doing well.
So I think it was Monday night, Brad was riding his bicycle, and somebody ran a stop sign and hit him. And Diane Bowden got a call on her telephone, voicemail, with a groggy Brad saying I was involved in an accident. I'm in room 482. Was it 482? 492. We're on the 4th floor. So we go to John Muir. We didn't even ask which. Apparently, there's more than one John Muir hospital. And so we rolled into the Walnut Creek, and they didn't have his name in the computer system. And then these guys informed me there's actually one in Concord. I'm going, wow, so we're at the wrong one. And they finally located him, but in the meantime, we're actually standing behind. You can't get in there. There's a bunch of guards. It's like going through an airport to get into a hospital nowadays. Well, I didn't know that because I try to stay away from those areas.
You're right.
So they finally located him, and sure enough, he's in room 492, trauma ward, and we walk all the way through the hospital, go up the elevator to the 4th floor, and the doors are all locked, and we're in this little room. We got to make a phone call. The doors pop open. We walk in, and we hear this huge snoring coming from room 492, and there was Brad, and it turned out he broke his rib, he broke his clavicle, and he punctured his lungs. So he was in great pain, but he was on a lot of meds at the time. And I believe they released him either the next day or the day after. But what was funny about that day is he called up Matt and he wanted to review his board item. He wanted to review the comprehensive transportation plan or something. So they took him down there, and he's on pain meds. But he wanted to do that work. So he's back at home now, recuperating, and we miss him. So thank you for asking.
I just have, in the spirit of awards, I just wanted to report. I know that last month the WTS annual dinner coincided with the CCTA board meeting, and so I had the honor of attending with Ivy Morrison to accept their Project of the Year award for the Caldecott Tunnel. And it was really a wonderful evening, and there was a lot of enthusiasm about the project. Ivy did a fabulous job representing the board and the authority in her remarks. And I think that this Caldecott Tunnel has been a project that has been near and dear to WTS for many years, because it really represents the first large, major infrastructure project at a national level that has involved so many women in the project, everywhere from Bimla Reinhardt being the head of the California Transportation Commission, all the way to all the people, many in this room that were involved, many women in the various agencies, but also it included also women who are graduates of the Contra Costa College apprenticeship program. One young woman who was working as a carpenter on some of the framing on the tunnel. So it's been a project. So there was a lot of warm feelings in the room celebrating Contra Costa for the Caldecott Tunnel, and a lot of appreciative women who drive that corridor, and they were thrilled. So thank you. It was a pleasure to be able to represent the authority there.